Today I'm here to talk to you about drugs. But really, what I'm here to talk to you about is the Constitution. And the video that you just saw, my reason for showing that, besides liking Cheech and Chong, was that I'm going to kind of use that to put a face to the things that we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about drug testing, why we do it the way we do it. Obviously, that was Cheech and Chong. For those of you born after 1990, they were a comedy group that put out some movies that kind of focused on smoking marijuana. And Cheech Marin is in the video, and you see what he's doing on his way to work. In my scenario, he's on his way to work. And kind of what we want to talk about is what you, as the employer, would do if this individual pulls up into your parking lot with the smoke rolling out of the windows of the car, and you realize you have a problem. So what do you think you'd do? Who would fire him on the spot? Who would send him for a random drug test? Anybody? Oh, good, that's a trick question. No, you can't send him on a random test. He's got to come up on a list. But you would not believe how many times I've been asked, can I just send him on a random drug test? Because we really think he's doing something. Third choice, who would observe his actions, maybe smell the smoke that's coming out of the car, and then make an assessment that maybe it would be reasonable to send him for a drug test? Yeah, everybody would. That's the way we do it. And why do we do it that way? Is because we are governmental entities. And the Fourth Amendment of the Constitution applies. All our employees have a right to privacy. We can't just pick somebody out and say, it's time for you to go take a drug test. Private sector, yeah, they can do that. We can't. We've got to recognize their privacy rights. We're going to talk about how you get there, what the triggering events might be for that kind of a test. And then there's a few changes to the law and just the way society is working now that we want to talk about a little bit, that you might want to incorporate into your policies, or at least into the training of your employees, to avoid problems in this area. The Fourth Amendment, you have a right to an unreasonable search and seizure. You have the right to privacy. We have to recognize that in the way we deal with our employees. Collecting blood, urine samples from an employee is all a search under the Constitution. And as you know, there are restrictions on government searches. So we've got to be careful and follow the law when we're taking action against employees, when we're testing employees, or the results of those tests could be found invalid because we violated the employee's rights. If you decide that, well, there's two ways. We can do the random testing. And a random test is generally taken of safety impact positions. A reasonable cause test or a reasonable suspicion test, and a reasonable suspicion test can be taken of anybody. Anybody that comes into the office that appears to be intoxicated, that appears to be high, that appears to be on drugs, that person can be sent on a reasonable suspicion basis for a drug test. You can determine whether or not they are under the influence, and if they are, you can take disciplinary action. You can also do that with safety impact people, But in addition to that, on safety impact positions, you can have a random testing procedure. And a lot of you do. It really has to be random. Generally, you have an outside agency that produce a list of a certain percentage of your employees that are in safety impact positions. They send it to you, and you send those individuals out for random testing. I think that's the best way to do it. I know some cities that generate the list themselves in their HR department, or they try to keep it separate from the departments that are being tested. That I don't like that, just because it's harder to defend. If somebody's claiming that you targeted them for this random test, it's a whole lot easier to defend that if it came from an outside entity rather than your own HR people who are generating the list. And the whole idea of the random testing or the testing in general, is you're balancing the employee's right to privacy with the employer's needs to keep an efficient and safe workplace. So when you're considering whether you send someone for testing, you've got to take that all into account. It's probably a good idea to talk to your lawyer and come up with it. I have dealt with cases where someone's going through a divorce, and the soon-to-be ex-spouse comes forward with these complaints about the drug dealing, the drug use, things by the other spouse, maybe trying to get an advantage in the divorce proceedings. Somewhere you've got to draw the line on when that becomes reasonable suspicion for drug testing. You have to take the circumstances all into account. And if this is a nasty divorce, there's been no indication whatsoever that your employee is doing drugs, is involved in drugs, you may take a step back. You may keep a close eye on that employee and watch to see if you see anything that would lead you to believe that there's something going on. But you don't want to just based on this rumor, and that's all it is at that point, that there's something going on, that they're dealing drugs. So you've got to be careful. Again, even if you get a positive test, if you don't have good grounds for getting that test, you're not going to be able to sustain it. Safety sensitive positions. These are the positions that you can do random testing on. And any of you all that have random testing, you know those positions. They're the heavy equipment operators. They're the police officers. They're the firefighters. Anybody who, if they take momentarily lapse in judgment, could cause severe consequences, is probably going to be somebody that you can randomly drug test. You have a right to protect the citizens, co-workers, and the employees themselves from their actions if they're in those kind of positions that are truly dangerous. Security sensitive positions, probably most of you don't have any of those. Police departments might. Somebody that's dealing with almost national safety kind of information. Not the kind of thing we're normally dealing with, like I said, except maybe in police departments. If you have these individuals, they're subject to random testing. There are lots of ways you can do this. There are different percentages of your safety sensitive positions that can be random tested. You want to make those decisions based on the size of your labor group, the cost of all of this can be prohibitive. A lot of you have clinics that you send your people to. I'm not really talking today about the procedures that you go through. Today we're just talking about when you decide to send somebody for a test and why you have to jump through these hoops to be able to send somebody for a test. police officers, or safety impact, firefighters. If you somebody that drives a pickup truck that is taking your employees from one site to another, somebody that's working alongside a very busy highway where if they took a wrong turn, drive their tractor out into traffic, it could cause serious injury. DOT, a lot of you, or at least some of you, have DOT employees, and they have their own rules and regulations for requiring random testing of those employees. And their rules may be a little different than the rules you have for your other non-DOT employees. So the more you can keep them in line, the easier it is for you to administrate that. But there are some things that they require that you may not, that the DOT requires that you may not want to deal with as the city. Non-safety sensitive, people that you cannot random test. When I was in the city attorney's office in Houston, the attorney that came into office, and he immediately issued an edict that everybody in the legal department was going to get drug tested. Secretaries, clerks, it didn't matter. He wanted to show he was tough on crime, that he was against drugs, and everybody was going to be tested. Well, a few people had a talk with him and said, that's probably not a good idea, and talked to him about the safety impact positions. He backed off on that. So you've got to be careful. Even though it sounds really good, we just want to keep drugs out of our workplace. We just want to keep all of our employees safe. That is not constitutionally a reason for drug testing. You've got to, for random testing. And if you don't have a reasonable cause and they're not subject to a random drug testing, then you really don't have a good reason to test those people. And if you do, it may well end up in a lawsuit, in a civil rights lawsuit, on constitutional claims. So elevator operators, industrial equipment mechanic, sanitation employee, librarians, secretaries, clerks, those positions generally are not going to be subject to random drug testing. However, if that person comes in, if that secretary comes in and is obviously intoxicated or is obviously high, and you can look at the circumstances and her actions or his actions and say, there's something wrong with that person, they appear to be inebriated, you can send them for a reasonable cause test. And employees that are in the police department, the fire department, heavily regulated industries, generally know that they're subject to random drug testing. Hopefully, your policies and procedures manual will notify employees that they are in what is considered safety impact position, because you don't want to surprise them. Something else that you might want to have in your policy manual that's kind of new, and you probably don't have this, is, as you know, there's a lot of things out on the market now that help with your pain. Gummies that may or may not contain THC. The labeling may not be accurate. So you may have employees that are exposing themselves, that are ingesting banned substances, who have no idea that they're doing so. They look at the label and it says the ingredients, and it doesn't include anything that would be banned from your policies. I think it would be a really good idea to have policies in effect or training to let employees know that they're still going to be held responsible for what they put in their bodies. And it's their duty to make sure that these gummies they're taking don't have any banned substance in it. And I think as long as you have made that clear to them, that they're on notice that they've got to go a little above and beyond to make sure what they're taking isn't banned, then I think when those positive tests come back and they say, oh, the only thing I've taken is this, and says it doesn't contain it, and it's like, sorry. This means that you are affected in your ability to do your job. That is what this policy is meant to take care of. And despite the fact that you didn't know that you were high, you were, and that is a violation of our policy. Okay. There we go. Testing applicants. As some of you may know, Cheech Marin, who was in the video that we watched at the beginning, later in his career as an actor, he became a member of the San Francisco Police Department in a sitcom or at least a cop show. Now, one thing I wondered about that was what was the background check like on him? That should have been caught. Given his previous lifestyle, you would think that some of those issues would have come up. Most personnel policy manuals that I've seen have a clause that everybody gets drug tested when they apply to come to work for you. That is not exactly correct. Pre-employment drug testing really should be limited to safety impact positions. The ones we talked about earlier where you can do random testing. I know that a lot of cities do pre-employment on everybody. And I'm telling you here that that is risky. You may catch some people and you may keep some people out of your workforce that you maybe wanted to, but if somebody pushes it, if somebody files a lawsuit over that issue, you may well lose because the pre-employment testing, the courts have said, should be limited to safety impact positions. Talked about reasonable suspicion. That, the smoke coming out of the car windows, the guy spraying sparks onto the flammable tanks, those kind of things. If it is just so bad, that's easy. The other things are a little more subtle. Red eyes, they're inattentive, they're making mistakes, there's a smell of marijuana on their clothes. Those are things you can look at when you're deciding whether to send them for a reasonable test. And I'm running out of time. And one other thing that I want to mention that's in a lot of your policy manuals is post-accident testing. A lot of us have policies that say if you're involved in an accident on the job, you're driving a vehicle, you're driving heavy equipment, if you're involved in an accident, we're going to drug test you. That is a risky way to go. It really should be limited to the person who was at fault. You certainly don't want to drug test the guy that was sitting in the seat next to the driver. You don't want to drug test the guy that was sitting at a stoplight and was rear-ended. Because if you get a positive test in that situation, they're going to get their job back and you're going to have somebody on your workforce that you know was high on the job. And you don't want to get yourself into that situation. If the person is unconscious and you can't tell whether he was at fault or not, then that's somebody you can test. If there's a death in the accident, then I think you can test the people that were involved, the drivers. So that is my 20 minutes. Thank you all for your attention. I hope I gave you a little information about how to do the drug testing. Thank you very much.